Superb. All right, I'm working on superb then. All right, for our visitors, we are going through the Bible, Genesis through the Revelation, and we are in Jeremiah this week, 7 through 13? 7 through 13, I think. And so we generally just open up the class with whatever folks have seen in their own reading. So we don't clutter it up with my rants, because I'll get to ranting before too long, typically. But anything that anybody saw in any of the chapters, if you had a chance to read 7 through 12 or even before. All right. Now, I'll start out with my questions then. My first question is in the way of a bit of review, and then the next question hopefully will be a little bit more pertinent to where I think we'll end up. First question, good reputation. Good reputation. Easy, softball. What's the upside of having a good reputation? Go ahead. Wow. Good. Fewer. That's huge. Fewer. That sounds like it comes from experience. Good luck hoping everyone, as we say down south, will love you. Go ahead.
Good reputation is something that you earn.
Hey, wow. Good reputation is something that you earn. That's the upside, so you don't have to worry about it just being gifted. Over time, maybe you can start out newborn. Not a whole lot bad to say about a newborn, right? But what's that?
It's also something that's easily damaged.
Easily damaged. Now we're getting to it. Easily damaged. Earned. So it's one of those things you can say, okay, this is not something that I was necessarily given, but over time, if it's endured, it's something that I've earned. And then two, you appreciate the need to protect it because it is, in fact, as we've talked about from time to time, easily damaged. Now we're starting to get to the flip side. Either one, good side or upside of having a good reputation, and then what's the downside of having a good reputation?
Having a good reputation is better than when you're looking for work.
Wow. Amen. Makes it a little bit easier, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A lot of people don't like it when you have a reputation for being good, honest.
Good night. Goes back to what you said before. Jesus, could he have done anything better to work on his reputation? Universally loved, right? Not so much. He came to bring not peace, but a sword, right? And by the time, we were talking last week with the brother about evangelism, the Gospel of John, when I first got out of preaching school, Gospel of John, for whatever reason, the way it was written just seemed to be the easiest way to talk about Jesus' life from a perspective of salvation. And one of the things that over and over talks about is the way in which his mere presence after a while, the reputation he had developed, as good as it was, it caused a division right down the middle of the people, right? Not everybody's going to love him. Some believed that he was speaking the truth as the Christ. Others, the more he did well, the more the hate rose, right? Or the worse his reputation got in certain circles. Go ahead. Downside of a good reputation. Go ahead.
Everyone has a much higher expectation of you, and then if you fall short, then suddenly you've lost everything because you're just a bad person all over.
It's these two right here. So then it's easily damaged, and you got rehabilitation to do. Go ahead.
But having a good reputation, it's like a two-sided coin. You got the upside where you're going to draw the right kind of people towards you. It's a good Christian reputation. But the downside is all the evil people out there are shooting for you, and they don't play fair.
Okay, now here's the thing. When the evil people are shooting for you, how do they do it? If we're going to call it, I like to stay away from good guys and bad guys. Only one good guy in the Bible. We know who that was, right? However, there are those who have more consistently evil intentions. How do they present? When you got a good, look, it's going down here right now. It's going to be a lapel mic today.
They say you can catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
There you go. Go ahead.
So they're going to come on you. A lot of times they're going to be kind and nice, and they're going to lead you down that path of straight.
That's right. So it doesn't all of a sudden happen in one moment. Like we said, the devil doesn't show up in a red suit, pointy horns, right? Comes in many different ways. Okay. We're getting closer to Jeremiah 8, which is where we should end up. Jeremiah 8 was where we should end up. So a little bit more related to what our brother said over here in terms of losing that good reputation. Okay, what's the upside in terms of the expectations? There's another side of the expectations that come with the good reputation that I'm also looking for. And why is the preacher guy, the preacher nerd asking about this? What's a little bit of same direction you're going, but what's another liability? You know, I did say upside, but now I want the liabilities, because you talked about the burden, right? What's another liability of the burden of having to live up to a good reputation? And this is the part that's review. I talked about it a little bit. It's only fair for me to just go ahead and get to what I'm thinking about, and it is. I talk about it all the time, right? It's one thing if I'm bombing on a Sunday, right? It's not going well. Nobody's listening, right? They may pick up 1 or 2 points here and there, but the danger is on a Sunday I sound good, but I'm flat out wrong. That's a heavier burden. Why? Because we talk about it. The Bible says teachers have a lower standard, lower threshold for what they're saying. No. So it can sound great. It can be going smooth. And God can be like, oh. And his disapproval isn't necessarily known right away. And so that is the other side of a good reputation. The better my reputation, the more people are willing to buy in to what I'm saying, whether it's true or not. And that's the thing that concerns me as a teacher. And that is what's going on here in Jeremiah chapter 8. That's what's going on here in Jeremiah chapter 8. But before I get there, try to throw it off into a whole nother conundrum, I can't think of another word, with my second question. Why, man, this could take all day, but, okay, what's the upside? No, what's the downside? Downside of falling out of love. This seems random, huh? Why is he asking all this? That seems obvious. Start with the easy question. What's the downside of falling out of love?
The person that comes behind that person, you already have a lower expectation of it.
Wow. Okay. So you could be carrying some of that hurt into the next relationship. Ouch. That's real. Anything else before I go on to the second question? What's the upside to falling out of love?
At least you had one.
Well, at least you had it, right? At least you had it. Go ahead, brother.
Well, if it's not someone that God wanted you to be with, then, that's,
Let's go.
that's
Right?
right. Because if it's not the right person, you can't, what is it? My grandfather used to say, you can't missionary date. You can't save someone, you know.
Oh, wow, right.
Yeah, like that. You can't do that.
Yeah.
You know,
That's huge. Yeah. And so, for how many folks, the person you married was the first person you ever fell in love with? Show of hands. That's huge. How many? What? Y'all doing well. If I ask that in Houston, I get no hands. That's all right. That's huge. Now, for everybody else, in order to truly fall in love with the person you ended up with, it might have hurt to fall out of love with somebody, but as a practical matter, you really needed to fall out of love with whoever was going on before, so that you could fully focus on being married and committed the way in which God has called you to. So there is an upside to falling out of love, because at a certain point, bad as it hurts, it's just practical. If you're going to have, as a single guy's perspective, just an outsider's perspective, a happy marriage. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Wow. You said often, huh? Like you're waking up every day, therefore, yeah, conscious decision, right? You do, look, even if I haven't been through it, I was a youth and family minister. It's not the first time I've heard that. So you're not alone, okay? Not alone at all, okay? And with that, let's go ahead and jump into the passage, and hopefully both of those questions, before we get done, both of those questions will be a little bit more clear why I might have asked them. So whoever wants to start out, Jeremiah 8, beginning at verse 1. Please don't make me read it. Go ahead. Go ahead.
At that time, said the Lord, they shall bring out the bones of the kings of Judah, and the bones of his princes, and the bones of his priests, and the bones of the prophets, and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem out of their graves. And they shall spread them before the sun and the moon and all the hosts of heaven, whom they have loved and whom they have served, and after whom they have walked they have sought, and whom they have worshipped. They shall not be gathered, nor buried. They shall be for dung upon the face of the earth. And death shall be chosen rather than life by all the residue of them that remain of this evil family, which remain in all the places whither I have driven them, said the Lord of hosts.
Okay, thank you, brother. We could pause right there. That verse 2, the end of verse 2. They shall be scattered as dung on the surface of the ground. Where else have we heard that? Where else have we heard that? Except it's not as, it was literally in the form of. It's not people. There was somebody who was spread out. Because when they passed, that's it. How did Jezebel end up being spread out? Where? And I didn't double check this point, but I'm pretty sure she was spread out at a specific place. Dogs ate her, so she could not be buried. And she ended up being spread around, I think it was Naboth's vineyard. And so the very vineyard she helped to steal, she was spread around in the form of, right? And so now we have this metaphor coming back again, because that's all gone, right? That's early in the kingdom, in the divided kingdom. Now we're coming toward the end, and God is bringing that metaphor back again. I want to dwell on that a whole lot, but I'm going to suggest that might be an indication of how mad God is at this point. Because he's pretty mad at Ahab and Jezebel. So mad that he completely eradicated that line, right? And so when we're talking about what's the future going to look like for Judah, he's talking about a remnant, but he's also talking about this particular family. It doesn't sound like he's talking about a biological or lineal family, because he's talking about all kinds of folks, the kings, the officials, the prophets, the priests, and all the inhabitants. But there's something he's seeming that he's going to get rid of in Judah. And why do you think that might be? We talked about it before. Why is he cleaning house this way in Judah? What's the plan?
They have been so unfaithful
Yeah.
that in these chapters, it sounds like he's going to give somebody a last chance,
That's it. Go ahead.
but it's not really them. They're done. He's done with them.
Now, here's the thing. We've been talking about the concept of, what you were talking about, is the remnant, right? And every other time we've been talking about the remnant, it's been like they're the good guys, which is why I don't like to talk about good guys and bad guys. But look at verse 3 here. What does he say about the remnant in verse 3? Wow. Does that sound like you want to be one of the survivors? Yeah. And so that's how bad it's gotten. Every other time we talked about the remnant, it's been like, whew. This time it doesn't sound so good. And so that's why I'm thinking there are two subsets of the remnant. Because when they are finally delivered, it's not going to be great. There's still going to be a division amongst the remnant as to which way we should go. Those who are left in the land, if you've ever been through difficult times, you probably aren't as confident as you were before the difficulties. And so they're left there, but they're not sure they're secure. The army's gone. All the security that they could look at and touch is tangible. Okay, we're not doing really well here because he left and ended up leaving the poorest people in the land, but we at least had some kind of security. Now we're just kind of really having to trust God. And I don't know if you've ever been in a point in life, or even as a preacher, or wherever you've been in your life, there's a time in which it's easy to trust God because, like we say, we're around the believers. But then there's a time when all that talking you're doing, Marcus, you're going to have to be alone in a place where all the things you might look to for safety, they're gone. So what does faith look like then? And so that's the tough choice they're going to be faced with when we're the survivors. Not everybody's going to agree that same thing. The thing he's trying to weed out at this point is doubt. Because ultimately it's going to be a very tragic story when he leaves the remnant. They're not going to make it because doubt is going to seep back in to their way of thinking through a couple of people. And the one who is keeping them stable, God told us to do this, so we just need to stay put. Even if we don't have an army anymore, he's going to get assassinated. I'm jumping way ahead. But I'm letting you know why God is trying to clean out a certain mentality from Israel or Judah at this point. Because the same point of entry that, it's just like I told you when I was trying to clear out my house to go to the mission field. A brother who sold the house to me or helped negotiate for me, he was a realtor in the church. He's one of the elders. And so he can give me more advice than you get from your average realtor. It's like, Marcus, I was splitting time. I went back to the church I used to be at when I was a youth minister to help them try to get their program back together right before I went to the mission field. And I was living 2 weeks in East Texas, out near Dallas, and I was coming back every 2 weeks to where I was living in New Mexico. Yeah, that's a drive. And when I moved out, critters moved in. Because all the places I didn't think I needed to patch up when I was living there every day, when I came back from a couple of those breaks, now all of a sudden I had visitors. And now I had to find where the holes were really at. And so I thought I looked thorough at first, but all those little places I thought, oh, that's not really going to matter, those were old points of entry that made for fresh visitors. And so that's what's happening in Israel right now. All the old points of entry, God's trying to get them to seal up, because when they come back into the land, if you haven't sealed those old points of entry up, says the, good night, I'm sorry. It's new, so I'm working with it, sorry. All those old points of entry are going to be a fresh avenue for the enemy to get in. And that's what happened in Israel at this time. They're not going to see it. And so that's why sometimes in life, God seems like he might be taking me through the same trial over and over and over. And I'm tired. It's like, what did I do wrong this time? We've talked about it before. It's not always that I'm doing something wrong, as much as God is trying to get me to tighten up those points of entry for places he's taking me later. And so therefore, being discouraged is one of those things, God willing, we can overcome. If we realize that sometimes God is dragging us through the same difficulty again, not necessarily because we sin, but because he needs us to tighten up the points of entry, right? All right, shut up. Please keep reading. Maybe this time I can tell you better. I actually previewed the chapter this time. 4 through 7, please. 4 through 7.
Moreover, thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord, shall they fall and not arise? Shall he turn away and not return? Why then is this people of Jerusalem slidden back by perpetual backsliding? They hold fast deceit, they refuse to return. I hearkened and heard, but they spake not aright. No man repented him of his wickedness, saying, What have I done? Everyone turned to his course, as the horse rusheth into the battle.
Verse 7. But you can really pause there. But that's I'm gonna make a point there, so right? Where have we seen that before? Everyone, now I'm cheating now, I'm trying to make it. Everyone turns to his own course. Everyone turns to his own course.
Noah.
No. I wasn't even thinking back that far. Go ahead. Noah. How so?
Everybody was doing, well, there's another one I'm thinking about too.
Go ahead.
It's probably better than what Wesley has, but with Noah, every thought was evil.
All the time.
In man's heart and
Yeah.
mind. But there is another one that I thought of after I said that, that you're,
Probably thinking of?
yeah,
Go ahead.
but I don't remember what's that.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Judges,
That's it.
everyone did what's right on their own side.
We say repetition breeds emphasis. He says it twice. I used to be like, when I was first talking about it, I saw it at the end of the chapter. I was like, it says it at the end of the chapter. Like, no, actually it says it twice. And so he's really emphasizing that was well settled into Israel at that time, right? Now we're in the divided kingdom. Once again, those points of entry have not been sealed up. And so now you're starting to see, as the judges were entering their decline and they were going into the time of the kings, it was marked by the fact that they were doing whatever they wanted, right? And likewise, as the final portion of the kingdom is being carted off into captivity, pretty much whatever you want to do, that's the law, right? And so that's where we're seeing these cycles repeat. And I refer to it, like I said, sometimes I get a little bit nervous because I repeat a whole lot of stuff. And so if I repeat it again, please start being like, I never said this, but when I teach class, there are always 2 rules that are okay. I forget everything, but it's an exaggeration. That's not my Bible. So you can always interrupt and say, that's not my Bible. Why? Because we're always looking at different translations. And if we're being a Berean, it's one thing to have a different translation. It's another thing for me to misstate something in a way that we're going to get to, right? And so we all need that correction. But you can also, sometimes, God willing, the more comfortable we get with one another, you be like, bro, I think it might be time to move it on because you said that before. And I'm getting to an age where I need people to remind me that I said stuff before. Everybody's included. Mom has to help me out with that too. So sometimes I'll forget the stuff I preach because I don't go back to my old lessons like I used to because I'm doing content way too much. So I forget the stuff I've said before.
So we just covered the repetition is important.
In moderation. In moderation and targeted repetition. No, you're right. I appreciate that thought. I'm trying to avoid the untargeted, random repetition. But I've told this story before. Now, see, I did all that, and I forgot the story I was going to tell. So now you have to worry. Hopefully, I'll remember. The point was, though, maybe it'll jog my memory. Yeah, everyone had turned to his own cause. And so that's the thing that it's also going to pick up with later on in the chapter, is it is not just the fact that they are disobeying God. It's downrange. What's the consequence? And so God very rarely, when he's talking about his own glory, it's not because he needs our applause. He doesn't need us to clap. He doesn't care, right? We didn't emphasize it in Isaiah 40, but it's one of those chapters that when he was talking about idolatry, one of the ways he was talking about, okay, how are you, if you're really going to, if you had never seen a car before, you were in the era before anybody knew what a car was, somebody told you to make a car. Good luck with that, right? All right, now he's saying, okay, make a God. What blueprint are you going to use? You don't know what he's actually like. And that's what he said in Isaiah 40. And the problem is, when we continue to try to make a God when we don't know what he's actually like, it's always going to come out wrong. And so that's what's happening here. The problem isn't that he needs us to just obey him. It's when we're trying to move forward without the right concept of what things really are, then we're making a huge mess. It's like when we're kids and parents are trying to bear with us because we're trying real hard, but at the same time, we're teaching in class and the kids are trying real hard, but it's just not coming out right. And it's one thing if it's just a mistake, but it's another thing when they're determined to do it in a way that you know is not going to produce the right results. And so at a certain point, you maybe just throw your hands up and you let them figure it out. Hey, and that's kind of what this chapter does. This is a chapter where he's talking about, he's kind of, in some ways, thrown his hands up. He's told them where it's going to end. But they need to see it for themselves, that they're never going to be able to produce what they're trying to produce. As we go on to verse 7, brother, verse 7.
Yeah, the stork in the heaven knoweth her appointed times, and the turtle and the crane and the swallow observe the time of their coming. For my people know not the judgment of the Lord. All
right. Just that one verse is good. Keep asking, where have we heard that before? But where have we heard that before? Too loud? It's falling? Oh, it did fall. Y'all can still hear me? Yeah? It works good.
Jesus references the same concept when he's talking about Jerusalem on the way, when he's from Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the prophet, how I wanted to take you,
As the hen would gather chicks, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's huge because that's going to link with another concept. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Wasn't it Josiah, when they had lost the word of the Lord, they found the word of the Lord?
Yeah. Josiah was the king. Okay, so we talked about the two stages. Hezekiah was a great reformer, but what was the difference between Hezekiah and Josiah? Two great reformers, the last two great kings of Judah. What was the difference between the two of them? Hezekiah was trying to rehabilitate a nation that had completely lost the law. And so he set the foundation once he said, okay, let's clean up the temple that I think it was Ahaz had completely, when he said he was going without God, he doubled down on it. He's like, if I'm going out without God, everybody's going without God. He shut the doors of the temple so nobody could get it. And so when they finally opened the doors of the temple, they cleaned everything up that had been made a mess under Ahaz. They were pretty much trying to, as we said, when you're making an idol, you're trying to go with what your best guess is. And that was what Hezekiah's reign was like. He was doing so much cleanup and reform, they didn't really know what the law of the Lord said. So by the time you get to Josiah, they finally find what the law of the Lord is actually saying. And they're like, oh my goodness, we thought we were doing great because we were trying 100% to follow God, but we've been sinning in this, and this, and this, and that was Josiah's great reform. He brought them back into proper alignment. Not just heart wanting to do the right thing, proper alignment with things that God was actually calling them to do, right? And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, if we go back to Psalm 115, somebody wants to go 1 to Psalm 115 and 1 to Psalm 135, that's what's going to really remind me of what we're seeing here in Jeremiah 8, verse 7. I probably should give you a verse, right? Psalm 115. maybe verses 4 through 8 in Psalm 115, and then in Psalm 135. Okay. And whoever has Psalm 135, let's get 15 through 18. And thank you, sister, whenever you're ready.
Their idols are silver and gold, the work of human hands. They have mouths but do not speak, eyes but do not see. They have ears but do not hear, noses but do not smell. They have hands but do not feel, feet but do not walk, and they do not make a sound in their throat. Those who make them become like them. So do all who trust in them.
That's it. That's it. Okay, now who has Psalm 135? We're going to see a completely different perspective in Psalm 135. What does that say? Was it? No, I think that was 115. But that's an easy mistake to make, as you'll see. Go ahead. Psalm 135 and 15 through 18. What does that one say?
The idols of the nations are but silver and gold, the work of man's hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak. They have eyes, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. Nor is there any breath at all in their mouths. Those who make them will be like them. Yes, everyone who trusts in them.
They're almost identical, right? And so small group, folks who are in the small group, this is why I'm definitely redundant, because we talked about this in small group. And so if you remember, why do we say that that's kind of an interesting thing? I probably, since I say the same thing to y'all like every other week or whatever, and also to young adults, if you remember, why does that possibly connect to where we are in Jeremiah 8? Even the stork knows, even the turtle dove knows, even the swallow knows, even the crane knows. But my people don't know. How does that relate to what we just heard in those two songs?
Because they wandered off to these idols and these false gods.
And what's the effect? What's the effect downrange? To the effect that
They don't even recognize the real God.
they don't recognize the real God, but even more practically. Okay, let me tell you an illustration. This is an illustration y'all might remember from small group. If I have a boss and I am always kissing up, okay, we'll say not the elders not here, but either way, okay, same thing. I'm always kissing up to the elders. We don't have to worry about that because y'all, okay. So if I was hopefully, as I'm praying to be a little bit, if I'm hard to work with now, y'all just let me know in private and I'll work on it. But if it was the opposite and I was always kissing up to the elders and people couldn't trust what I was saying because they know whatever he says, he's just going to tell you what the elders are saying. Might as well just go ask them. That's it. Why do I begin to lose credibility if that's all I'm saying? If whatever the elders are saying is all I'm ever going to say. Over time, that affects my credibility. Why?
Because you're not speaking of your own support.
Yeah. And why am I doing that? Am I doing that because I just love you all that much? Or am I just, I should, right? Or am I just trying to butter you up because maybe I want something? I want a little bit easier path in life. I want things to go better. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, that reminds me of those that follow the man instead of follow God. The man becomes right, and all that they're just taking in what they hear, what they see. They're not like the Bereans searching out the scriptures.
Searching for themselves. So Paul shows up. He probably had a pretty decent reputation right about then. But it says they were more noble than the other folks he ran into because they didn't just reject what he was saying just because they didn't like it, and they didn't believe it just because they did like it. They actually searched to find an objective standard of what actually happened, right? Now here, what's the, other than it just damaging my reputation, as we talked about reputation earlier on, what also happens if all I'm ever doing is thinking the elders' thoughts? Over time, let's play that out over 20 years. If all I'm ever doing is trying to gauge truth through the lens of what I think the elders or anybody else wants to see, what happens to my own ability to think and reason over time if that's all I'm trying to do? Is shore up my position, be popular, What's that? Thank you. Right? And so I become you. I become like you. I become a cheap imitation of you. I can never be you, but I'm just a cheap imitation of what I think you want to hear. And that's what's happening in these books. They're becoming like rocks. They're becoming like the wood. They're not able to reason at any higher level than, oh, now we get to Jeremiah chapter 8. The stork, the turtle dove, the swallow, the crane. They have a better understanding of what God wants from them than you do, right? Because they've still been listening. And that's why we talk about from time to time, it's not talent. It's not talent. Talent is cool, but it's a great distraction from the fact that God is the source of, like I was talking about the singer who has no arms, and then the preacher who has no arms and legs. Over time, I told you, he's able to speak in a situation where the generation, we got a huge generation gap right now, right? How many of the older folks are always going to the younger folks asking for advice on anything that doesn't have to do with technology? Right? But I'm telling you, this young man with no arms and no legs, he's speaking in a way that older people are quoting his lyrics because he's talking about pain and suffering at a level everyone can respect. Because God's put him in a circumstance, he can't mimic anybody he knows. He doesn't know anybody else in that situation. And so if he's going to survive, he's going to have to depend upon God. And he's going to have a unique voice. And one of the things he talks about is the pressure that he felt because he was so different once he finally found acceptance to try to be like everybody else. And he had nothing to say. But now he's a young man who all kinds of people listen to because he found his courage being that different to also find the value in having a different voice. And so he's the opposite of what we see here. But it's the same temptation we all have. We all want to be loved, right? We all want to be liked. We all want the day just to go a little bit more smoothly. But over time, if that's all we do, we lose our God-given ability. Nobody else can run in our lane the way that we can. And the more I'm trying to be like somebody else for whatever reason, the more I'm losing what God literally created me, not anybody else, to do, right? I'm sorry.
This may be kind of out of what you're talking about, but to me it fits. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 13:1, talking about the plain symbol. Love is gone. Though I speak with the tongues of men and angels that have not love, I have become the sounding brass or a plain symbol. If you are just speaking what the leadership wants you to speak, you have just become that plain symbol. You know?
Empty words, right?
Yes.
Amen. All right, so now I got permission to be. No, I'm joking. No. But no, seriously, we each individually have a lane, and that's the one thing. I once struggle with telling too many stories. But, one of our young people, back when I was a youth minister, really down all the time, had trouble finding her lane, And it's because the standard in the group had begun to shift around a couple of, really one talented individual. And everybody was trying to live up to the standard of that individual, but not everybody had his talents, right? And so unless they were winning in that way, it felt like it was losing. She found her way out by being the school mascot, because nobody had to necessarily know who it was outside of the people who knew who the school mascot was. So her personality could begin to come out when she was in game day. Everybody was looking at her, but they didn't know it was her. And so then her personality could start to blossom. I got you, Paul. And so it's little stuff like that. Her lane was completely different, but the pressure to be somebody else had her in a place where she just could not grow. And so that's the thing with all of us. We have to find. It's difficult to find, but it's one of the reasons why it's good that God takes us into places of isolation, because there's certain things that no one can help us with, because no one is just like us. And so in order to keep it moving and hopefully get to the end, let's go ahead and at least read the next few verses. Let's maybe go from 8 through, we'll try to get 8 through 12. I'll probably pause, but 8 through 12, please. Whoever. Go ahead. Oh, Jeremiah 8 through 12. That's fine. Whoever wants to read.
How do we say we are wise and the law of the Lord is with us? Lo, certainly in vain made he it. The pen of the scribes is in vain. The wise men are ashamed. They are dismayed and taken. Lo, they have rejected the word of the Lord And what wisdom is in them?
Please, somebody give me another translation of verse 8. He has the pen of the scribes, and there was something he said about the pen of the scribes. I want to get another translation of it. Somebody has it.
But behold, the lying
The lying pen of the scribes, right? So now we have another face of idolatry. No, now we're no longer spinning a narrative, and that's what we talked about. We lose idolatry if we forget the fact that it fundamentally works the same way today. We're like, well, why would I bow down to a podium or a block of wood? It's not the wood or the stone. It's the fact that I get the freedom to write my own narrative about what that thing expects from me. And so anytime God expects something that's too hard for me, I'm starting to, that's not what my buddy says. He's a much more loving God than that one. That one's saying, if I can't, then... And so that's the same thing that's going on here. Now we're seeing who's helping. And so you don't have to have an idol. You don't have to be like the pagans. Now you can be a good Bible-believing or Torah-believing, Torah-observant Israelite, making the same mistake a different way. Because now the scribes are putting their seal of approval, and that's why reputation is so important. Because the scribes lend credibility to the sin. And they are writing literally the heresy into the people who are now facing being basically destroyed. And here's the thing. I think we've all heard, Lord, Lord, did we not? But Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is going to say, depart from me, for I never... And that's the frightening thing. It's that to the degree, to this day, idolatry takes place or takes the form of the same shape or takes the same structure, what ends up happening is we can be super fired up for a God that we wrote, right? And the more passionate we get about serving that God, then we get, that's the Lord, Lord. It's not like we're not serving anybody. It's not like we're not going to church. It's we never committed to the God who exists. And that goes back to the fundamental of what an idol actually is. We're worshiping something different. And so that's the danger of feeling super saved, but at the same time walking a path. It's like if I started spending money, and one of our folks, I've used the expert all the time. They look at back when we use cash more than we use cards. They're like, Marcus, I got bad news, bro. This bill, that's not, it's counterfeit. I'm like, you're joking. Because I got stacks of these bills, bro. That's all I got now, right? And I have become so, think of yourself. If your bank account, whatever you got, if it's all cleared out, that's hard news. You're not going to want to let go of that. But that's where that whole concept of falling out of love comes into play. What's happening with Israel is they're having a hard time falling in love with the God that exists because they spent so long loving a counterfeit representation of what God was. And so they can never fully come to know who God is because they're stuck loving the God that was created for them or that they created. And it's the same challenge we have today. Because there is something about God that you don't want to believe. I don't want to believe. Because it's requiring me to get back out on that, for our folks who are actually in the military, get back out on that battlefield one more time when I thought I still had some days of, what do you call it, R&R? Leave. I still had some days of leave. It's like I feel like I'm getting called back early. No, you told me I had this long on leave, bruh. Right? You got to go back. And so that's sometimes what it feels like to make changes in our life. But if you don't go back, the general ain't the commander of the U.S. forces. The commander's God. And so that's why that whole concept of falling out of love is so important. Because in order to be the kind of servant that God is really calling me to be, we all have some things that we have to fall out of love with. If we are truly going to open ourselves to all that he's trying to, don't be conformed, but be, we're going to be transformed. It's like falling out of love, right? All right, Joe. Any questions? Go ahead, brother.
One point I read past way back in verse 5. Why then is this people of Jerusalem? It sounds like poor English, but what he's saying is these people are so united, they're moving as one.
Please hold that for next week. I guarantee I'm going to forget it if I don't write it down. But going forward, it's the danger of, that's another thing. Teamwork feels good once you finally have it. But if you don't have it aligned with purpose, it's dangerous. super dangerous, and that's what's happening here. That's how you're getting, instead of, like we'll see in the Revelation,